Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first day of the conference. I'm really excited to be here with you today. I'm Laura. I previously worked at Yelp and Slack for several years, and I joined Slack during the pre-IPO phase, which is sort of in this startup period before a company goes public. And then we had a really great time, and I was working on the messaging team and decided that, we got acquired by Salesforce, and it was just time to do something new and change it up a bit. So you definitely can't read this email, but it is from Logan Head, who is the CTO of Whatnot. And he says, we're building this e-commerce website and phone app, and please, consider us. It's kind of like, eBay, but with video, and we just raised a round of funding. And I was like, I get a lot of these emails, maybe not the time for me. And then a little bit later, I was like, I actually was talking about something very similar a couple years ago with friends. They were talking about platforms in Asia that were doing something similar, and how it would be really great if we had something like that in the United States. My idea was specifically more around fashion. Because that's what I'm most interested in as my hobby. But he was selling Funko Pops and Pokemon cards. And so how do you transfer all of these ideas? You get something called Whatnot. So today we're going to talk about how do you not only build a rocket ship, but continue to build it while it's already taken off. So when I joined Whatnot, it was this idea of a live streaming shopping platform. The really innovative part was the addition of auctions, and they had this React Native app that was doing very well, and everyone was super excited about. So here's the timeline. It just so happens that I agreed to join Whatnot like a week after I also got a puppy. So it was a really wild time in my life this last year, from getting a puppy and actually launching the app. They all corresponded at the exact same time. So here's a timeline of Olaf, my dog, at the same time. But you can see I started my job search, committed to joining Whatnot, started at Whatnot, started the dogs channel in the Slack. I made a plan. I hired a second iOS engineer. I crunched. I did a lot of work. I wrote a lot of code. And then I realized I can only do so much. And so I called for reinforcements. This is when having connections, making those connections early in your career really matters. I was able to call on people who I had known for a really long time to support me. Then August, really try and finish. We're already running behind. Then we had a false launch. I'll tell you all about that. Then we actually launched the app. And then we had giveaways announced, which is a feature that was that I'll talk to you about that was inside of the app. And then Logan Paul, who's a YouTube personality, ends up giving away $1 million in Pokemon cards within the same time frame. So essentially we went from I created the repo to somebody's giving $1 million away of product within an hour in 6 months. So the first thing in order to build a rocket ship is to know your crew. This was my crew. They are just like some of the lights of my life now. We started this crazy process together very early on. So there's me, Rick, who was at Whatnot for a short period of time. There's Adam Rothman. He is an iOS engineer, but he's actually a staff security engineer at Slack. He was the person who I called as my reinforcements. We have Andy, who did Android, Hyun Woo, who did Android QA. I had never worked with a QA team so in-depthly as I have at Whatnot, and now Anthony and Kayla are two of my right-hand people. I really depend on them. I highly recommend if you ever join a company that has QA, make them your best friends, because the quality of your app is going to just skyrocket. Then we have our designers, Kyle, who's the head of design, and then we have Amanda, who was his right-hand woman. So the first thing, we had a YouTube video that kind of went AWOL, but so I'll just describe it to you. The first thing that you need to do when starting this process is do your research. And this is not from a technical aspect. You should already be there if you're in a moment where you're converting an act from React Native to native. And I'll go into the more technical specificities of that. But like, this is the mistake that I made. If I could redo it all, I'd do this. I would actually like use the product in-depthly for 3 days. If I had just slowed down and taken a step back, I had gone through the app, I had used the app, I had joined the company, but there's a difference between casually using an app and being a seller on the platform, running auctions, doing shipping, all these different things that people use your app for. I did not actually do. And so I did not really understand the scope of what I was getting into. I don't think anyone on the team did. So this is the step that I really regret. It would have saved me a ton of time. Those 3 days would have saved me weeks if I had spent a little bit more time understanding where I was at. So now we've done our research, we're thinking about, we need to take stock and make a plan. So take a step back and think, why are you actually rebuilding the app? So you're rebuilding the app from scratch on something that's already quite successful. It's already doing well, people are using the platform, everyone's excited about it. It's in this technology, but not necessarily a lot of people know that it's in React Native, and you want to convert it to a native app. Why? Generally, it's around the SDKs not being compatible. So we're a live video streaming platform that uses something called Agora, which is an SDK to stream video. If you are using Agora then through the lens of React Native actually transposes that video in a way that makes it pretty blurry when you put it through the lens of Agora. So first off, we thought of, okay, you need to have better video quality. That's like the reasoning behind. There's also some really great Airbnb blog posts about why you should not use React Native. If I were just to make a recommendation to anyone in this room, if you are trying to find product market fit, React Native is fantastic. Like, do it. It is going to be fast. It'll work on Android and iOS, but it's not going to be the thing that takes you to the moon. It's going to get you just to like base camp. So when I was rewriting the app, I had to take stock of like, what are the things that I know about applications? What is my expertise? So I previously worked at Yelp, which was one of the oldest apps in the App Store. It was in the first App Store when Steve Jobs announced it. And I had gotten to see that repo, the repository of code, develop over time, over a decade. And I got to see some of the mistakes, some of the changes in the language, the things that we want to, guard ourselves against. And these were the three things that I really honed in on as like taking a stock and like, what was I going to do as a plan to start this? So first step, start my repo. Then I think about, okay, so I've worked on 3 different internationalization teams, from Brazil to launching, oh my goodness, I think I've launched in like 10 different countries for Slack and Yelp. It was like a whole thing. So I was like, I remember that being really challenging. So one thing I don't want to do is use Interface Builder. Interface Builder is something that Xcode gives you as a way of making it easier to configure all of your views. It is one of the worst things that you can do when it comes to having collaboration between people because it's not able to be code reviewed. It also really sort of magics away some of the auto layout. So if I were to recommend something, start off when you're starting off your a new iOS app, is really learn how to write auto layout from scratch. I can basically just cruise and just like write an entire like view structure because I've been doing it for 8 years, but I've also been like practicing for that amount of time. If I had started off with Interface Builder, I would have not had that type of knowledge to really be successful as a professional iOS engineer, and it would really have hurt internationalization efforts long term for my companies. Another thing you need to do is immediately kill any scope creep. So designers are fantastic. They have the vision of what they want the app to be, and you have the data about what the app can be, which is but sometimes not the exact same thing. So unless you have a backend team that's able to build out a new API and give you new data, you don't necessarily have all of the data to represent on the page. So the first thing that I did was I went through, looked at the designs, and was like, do I have the representations of data to actually display the screen? So a good example is like, do I know how many people have liked this live stream? No? I need to get a backend engineer to build me an API. So that was the main thing, is to all coalesce around a more standard idea of what data do we have and what are we going to represent to our users. And then also, you are never writing code for yourself. You're probably, even if you write code, you probably won't remember it like 2 months later. You're writing code for the next person. And you also know that as technology evolves, it never lasts. So you're constantly having to change up what implementation it is, what technology you're using, all these different things. And that was the thing that I really learned at Yelp and Slack. I learned that I knew a technology, but I knew that it would not be around for forever, and I needed to modularize and really think about how things could be pulled out in various fashions. So finally, on this know that nothing lasts, is like, trust your expertise, trust that you know what you're doing. Like, you are jumping into this void, and you really need to trust yourself. So early on, like in my first 2 weeks at Whatnot, I got into a massive discussion with the Android engineer, Andy. He was like, you know what, I think we should use Kotlin multi-platform. And I did this massive prospectus about how I did not believe that that was a good idea. And the reason that I felt that that was the case was because it was in beta. There were some issues with compatibility. So if if something didn't work, you had to drop down into C. So do we want to have engineers writing C in an iOS app? Probably not, especially for this platform. So really trust your gut, trust your knowledge of technologies, and make a plan based on that. So part of my knowing my previous technologies was knowing that APIs integrated into view controllers, which are the way that you control views on iOS apps, often are taken out. People love to change server clients on iOS apps. It just is the way that time evolves generally. And so at Slack, I learned about actions. So the way that this works is that I essentially have an action for bookmarking a live stream. I take in the live stream ID and if I should be following it, and then I run a completion handler. This is how every single API call looks for the entire app, and it doesn't need to know anything about Apollo, which is the client that we are using for GraphQL, which, by the way, is being ripped out right now, and we have to get rid of it. So all of it is not now integrated into hundreds of files into the app. Apollo is only integrated into 20, and it's a very easy process to just like modularize and rip out various pieces that are no longer serving you. Okay, so you made a plan, and normally you would think that this would be the end slide. You're like, oh, I'm launching, it's done. No, it is actually just our go time. You, or at least I, for this instance, was literally building the interior of the rocket ship after it had launched. In my second month of being there, they announced that they went from a Series A company. I joined when it was 30 people, and we had just raised our Series A at $4 million, and now we were already had our Series B preempted by Y Combinator's like exclusive blue chip fund. We needed the app out yesterday, and so it was like, what can I do? So I hired somebody new to help me out, and I started creating a toolkit. So I think that the thing that is most important is to really like keep it simple, keep it reusable. First thing I did when I was a first year at Yelp was they had me replace all of the colors. There were over 160 colors with 10 colors. And I remember spending 2 weeks tracking all of these down, and it was being one of the most annoying projects of my day. And so I did not want to do that to some first year, 10 years down the line. So I built myself a style guide. Do this, help yourself. Create a style guide. It'll make your life more consistent. I'm probably gonna tomorrow take down and cut in half, because as time changes and like designs change, we've really like cut them down. Make sure to give yourself little helpers. This convenience helper I've used in 6 repos. I just keep it. Make yourself little files that you use, and every time you go to a new job, you just have these in your back pocket, and you can always use them and feel like really secure that you know that you always have the APIs that you enjoy. So I made a standardized font, color, constants, and padding. Use them throughout the entire app. Anytime they wanted to change the background of the entire app, I just had to change one line instead of hundreds. The other thing that I did, which really was a foundational thing, was create a whatnot kit. So you're building out an entire app from scratch. You're not just building a small feature where you have like 3 labels. You're building hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of labels. All labels kind of have the same properties that you need, and they all have a very specific ways of configuring them. So you'll see here, this is my style font value. Takes in a view model. It gives me a consistent size, consistent fonts throughout the entire app. It takes in this. I gave to the next person a warning, telling them about transparency and how it can reduce the performance of your app if you use it in a table view. I wrote this. I use this all the time. It's the reason that I can churn out features really quickly if my team needs a little help. Now I'm a manager, and so I'm trying to write less code, but it's the reason I can go pretty fast. And then also, I kept it really modular. Everything's in like its own little files. They're all like very organized, and yeah. So the next thing that you need to do is just be consistent about this. It's going to be really hard. You're not going to want to be consistent. You've like made this plan, you've given yourself the tools, and now you have to use them. So here are my 3 major things. So if you have 3 things that are all the same, put it in your toolkit. You're probably going to need it many more times. I think 3 is kind of the crucial number. If you see yourself writing something once and twice, probably not something you need to over-optimize for, but that 3rd time really is a tipping point, and I highly recommend that you sort of see it as that moment. It will take you more time to break it out into its own module and make it more reusable, but then it'll save you infinitely down the line. If your files get over 500 lines, break it out into a new file. Figure out how you can break it out into a new class. This is just sort of a rough hand. I have a few files that have gone a little out of control, and the reason I know they're out of control is because they're too long. It's too hard for other engineers to keep all of this in their brain, and so they can't do bug fixes. You're writing code for the next person. I'm not going to be there to help out on the app for forever. I'm instead trying to be a good steward of it for the moment. The other thing is this sounds like a weird trick, but make all your folders in advance. So normally when you're like writing code, you're like, oh, I want to write a class. And then you write a class, and then you have like a few more classes. You're like, oh, that should go in a folder. They all seem similar. Actually, you should think about your folder structure prior. This will help you with naming, one of the hardest things in engineering, having good names, and it'll force you to already think about things as being broken out. So generally, I will create a folder with all of its subfolders, and then I fill in the classes. It'll also save you time, because you've already thought about the structure of your code a bit before you've even started, because you've thought about how it's going to be organized. So then when you actually get to writing your feature and actually get to writing all your classes, you've done 50% of the work right there. You're just filling in the gaps. And you're going to grind. I worked 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. Like, there are no free lunches on this. It is a lot of work, and it is probably the most rewarding time in my entire career. It brought me immense amount of joy. You're gonna really become close to your colleagues. You need to give a lot of people some grace and enjoy that time. This is also a time where I moved to LA from San Francisco. So it was very sleepless. Olaf was super helpful. While this is all going on, we had 100 Thieves, who is like they're big YouTubers in the Pokemon space, come and auction off a bunch of cards, and they went for a lot of money. So I'm grinding on the app. I'm like, oh, it's gonna be launched any day now. And I'm seeing massive amounts of money flowing through this platform, and it just feels worth it. You can feel this momentum and all of this excitement happening with the app. And so I did my first trial run in patio furniture in my living room, because furniture was like lost in the Panama Canal or something. And I'm like, okay, this is great. We didn't have a single crash on the trial run. Everyone's so excited. And then I had to think about distribution. And to think about, how do I get this to people? And there are a lot of different platforms that you can use, like Firebase, and then there's one that Microsoft does. And don't waste your time. Do whatever is native. You're already on this journey to go from React Native to truly native technology. Also use their distribution platform. Apple will continually punish you for trying to get around it. That is the secret to Apple. Understand that Apple wants you to do it a certain way, and instead of fighting it, just go with it and use the App Store Connect. And for Android, that is the Play Store. Then you're going to be giving it to your team. So my team, from the time it was 30 people, ballooned to 110 all of a sudden during the time, like the 4 months that I had been writing this app. And not everyone was happy. They had thought that they joined a different vessel. They got the new app, there were bugs, people were concerned, there's all this money flowing through the platform, and you're just trying to like stay above water. They haven't been experiencing these crazy hours that you have and all these like different, negotiations that you've done with design and QA and leadership. And I remember launching the app internally, and people were kind of mad. They were like, where is this feature, or where is that? And I really had to stick to my guns and say, I believe that this is like our future, and let me help you with anything you need. This is where you start to be thinking about your internal customers. And making sure that people who have other experience and context outside of yours in engineering, that they know what our users need sometimes better than you do, and you really need to trust that. So I took in a lot of feedback and really sort of thought about how to handle it, and the way you do it is ruthlessly. You have to sit down and like actually bug for bug prioritize, how do you think this is going to impact a customer, and really put yourself in their shoes. And it's going to be a lot of work, but you're going to get through it. And the main thing that I think really made the difference on the iOS app, and the reason that we have such high stability. So another issue with React Native app was there were a lot of crashes, and when we were trying to initially launch, the crash rate was like, we only had like 86% like successful sessions, and my goal was, because I had previously been at these like larger companies, and like if Slack goes down, we pay people, we pay our customers. It's like a major issue, and so every crash is a snowflake. The moment there is a crash, stop everything you're doing, deal with the crash. It is not a crash that goes on a list for you to think about later on, because the moment you start doing that, you start building infrastructure, building paradigms on top of a crash, on top of a shaky foundation. So the way I see it, it's a snowflake. Every crash is a snowflake, and you have to catch it before it hits the ground. Otherwise, it's never going to find it again. And now we have a 90, last time I checked, it was like 99.92% successful session rate. and we have always been incredibly stable like that consistently since our launch because I treated it this way. So now it's time for you to reevaluate. You've gotten all this feedback back. You've been really thinking about like, how does all of this coalesce? What are the features that you need to do? What are the things, the missing pieces? And you're gonna have to triage. I'm gonna show you what we use Asana for our issue tracking. This Asana is painstaking. I just came up with a system for this on Saturday. I have redone my Asana board for my team, I think 6 times now. And this is the one that we have gone through of hundreds of bugs. So if you are trying to organize your, different issues for a team, this is really what I recommend, because especially on young, new apps, people are gonna confuse bugs and features. Like, there are a lot of things that are like, oh, this is not great, but honestly, that's not a bug, it just wasn't built yet. Or it's a feature that we haven't finished. And so the way that I have now gotten it to be is QA, the lights of my life, they have a triage column. They put all of the items that they find in there. Those are really what I consider like first-class bugs. Those are the ones that I know that have really been thought through. These needs to be verified also goes to QA, because those are old bugs that I don't know if they are real anymore, so it gives them a place to work. Tech investments. These are all the pet projects that a team will come up with over time. They're like, I would love to like add logging here, do some exploration there. And yes, they're super important, but they're not necessarily always the thing that we have time to prioritize in that very moment. So I put them under tech investments so that we can better understand like how many there are and why, and if they have groupings, and kind of look and break them out from the bugs. Then you have your bugs. Everyone has a priority. You're going to have to sit down and rethink about what priority looks like. So P0 is everyone, it's a fire. To me, that's a crash, especially when you're early on in the app. P1s are within 3 days. And so every priority, I recommend that you assign a number of day that you have, like an SLA, a service level agreement, that you say, hey, it needs to be finished in X amount of time. P4 is like, probably never going to happen, but we're going to keep it around. And then features are just like small features that people are asking for, like changing of buttons or something like that. OKR work is basically like large projects. So this is after you finished your app. That's why I just reorganized this on Saturday. This is like the big features that you have coming out that we're all like looking at, having all of those organized. Next up, that's a place where people can just grab tickets. In progress actually means in progress. I am notorious for putting things in progress that I'm not working on. Don't do that to your team. That's me being bad. Only put things in progress that are actually in flight. So you've done it. You have built out a kit for yourself. You have continued to grind using that toolkit, and you've thought about the future with internationalization. You've thought about how your users are going to experience it, especially relating to crashes. You've thought about, just like, what does this mean for the business and whether it's the moment for it. So this is really, you've landed on the moon, but it's just one small step. It's just the beginning. You've created a foundation for yourself that will allow you to build upon for many years to come. There are very few opportunities in people's career that they get to start a repo from scratch, especially at a company that is now worth $1.5 billion. It went from just a small, tiny startup to a unicorn during the time that I was building it. And so I feel very confident that we have created a foundation for Whatnot that people will be able to extend upon, rebuild upon, rip things out from for many years to come. And here's what it ended up looking like. It's so much brighter, so much easier, so much less cluttered. This is actually today being launched. This middle one is a total redesign of like the layout and a great example of how I set myself up for the future. So this, I'll show you in another slide, looked very different. And I was able to basically redo the entire layout in a way that did not like cripple us or require even a feature flag. It has been in prod for like production for a week and a half, no crashes, no major issues. People were able to even add a new feature, that an explore section on the side. And it's really like setting us up for a place where we can add reactions, where we can add images that go with video content. And yeah. So here are some photos of us during this time. So this is Adam, the iOS engineer, and Kyle actually having a good time after this was all done. We ended up going skiing together as a group because we ended up liking each other so much by the end of it, which is a miracle. Definitely be friends with people. Like any fight that you have like during the app process, like just doesn't matter. You know, it's like you're in a unit and you need to see each other as resources and not competition. And that's definitely the case. This is me and Kayla. She's now one of my closest friends. I ended up becoming a manager and hosted like Pokemon card selling time, and they wanted me to do art on it, and I named it, and it was like during the winter time, so I did like an après ski themed time. This is when Olaf was a baby. This is us at the office. And then this is the old layout that I was mentioning, and see how different it was with chat and everything down there. A lot of the different UI is totally rewritten, and it took me a week. Like, rewrote the entire UI of Live in a week because I had set myself up for success in the beginning. And yeah, and now we are almost 150 employees. We are on our third round of funding. We've raised $225 million, valued at $1.5 billion. We have offices all over the world, and definitely growing. It is one of the most exciting times, so definitely feel like you can take that leap. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah. Describe React Native? Destroyed it. Yes, destroyed it. It was done. It was really sad. The engineer who built it, he messaged me. He's like, "You've killed my baby, but I'm glad that yours got to grow up." And I was like, oh my God. He now works on web and is like built out an entire web platform using React. So the great thing is if you haven't invested time in a web platform, a lot of that code is reusable, and you can reuse that, build out web, and it'll be great. So you can kill the React Native repo and move over. I will say that that is one of the most scary moments because of the bundle IDs. So essentially, you have to flip a switch. You can't live in two worlds for very long. The other thing that you'll notice is that what your old app used from an API perspective, your new app will inevitably use it slightly different. So, forgot to mention, that false launch, we took down the entire, like all of our servers because we were using the API differently, and we were just like hammering like the user table. And previously, like the React Native app accessed the user table once. And so you're gonna have these like moments where you're like, oh, my backend infrastructure doesn't look the same anymore. But yeah, React Native totally dead.
My question is like, as a React Native developer, what learning path would you recommend to learn native developing?
What would I use? Oh, the absolute gold standard. It is fantastic. So Paul Haggerty, spelled H-A-G or E-R-T-Y, Haggerty. He is the Stanford professor on iOS. He does a class every year at Stanford, and they put it all on iTunes. So every year he refreshes it based on the SDK. So the iOS SDK changes almost every year in some capacity, and like Paul will teach you. He's basically taught everyone in the Silicon Valley how to program in iOS. I didn't go to Stanford. I learned from Paul. Adam, he actually went to Stanford and took Paul's class. So it's on iTunes U, and I could not recommend it enough. He updates it all the time and is really, I've never seen somebody live code the way he does, so confident. He used to work at Apple at Next Computers with Steve Jobs for a long period of time, and he's like a consultant at the university. Any other questions? Oh, yes.
Hi, Warren. Thank you for the presentation. So my question is, what was your best and worst decision in your career, if you know any?
In my career?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Interesting. I think, to be honest, the best decision I made early on was becoming an iOS developer. I had originally learned to do web applications. There are a few reasons. To just be frank, the amount of web app engineers, the market is not conducive to being as successful as being an iOS engineer. There are a lot more people who can build a web app than there are people who can build production grade iOS apps. And that's because you can just, the beauty of a web app is you just open up the console. You're like, what do I want to do? Oh, what are they doing? And you just look it up, and it's fantastic. You can't do that on an iOS app. You have to really, really learn, and also sit down and understand how the metal, how the hardware and the software interact. But it's also one of the most rewarding things. You can understand performance in a very acute way. It's also less fractured as a platform. So I think that technically salaries can be higher for Android at times because they're rarer, but the development experience on Android is really not great. And you have to test for so many different things because they have such a fractured system, whereas iOS, you have Xcode, which has literally every device that you would need to support right there. I also, when we rebuilt the app, we had a much better crash rate because you don't have such a fractured system. So I have loved being an iOS engineer. I wouldn't change it for the world. You could not pry me away from working with Apple because they're specific, but in a good way. They always support. Worst decision in my career. This is kind of a meta answer, but I think that there was a period in my career, when I was mid-career. I'm not late career now, but I was mid my current career. And I didn't necessarily speak up about when things weren't going correctly. And I didn't have the confidence because I was 4 years into my career. I was oh, I'm a senior engineer, but, and I don't like what's going on, but I don't feel confident enough because I'm not, 10 years in my career. And so I ended up having a ton of different managers and a lot of different movement within one of my companies. And I think that I didn't feel as supported. And if I had just said something a bit earlier on, I would have been much happier and I would have grown more technically. So if there's a time in your career, and there will be, where you feel you're floating, and you'll know that, you'll know, oh, I just feel I'm learning stuff, I'm not really learning it at the rate that I would like, or I'm not really getting the type of feedback that I would like. You need to speak up. That was a big mistake on my part. Oh, yeah.
Hello, Laura. Thank you for your presentation. You talk about Apollo. Why did you kill it or GraphQL thing? And second question, is it possible to get your slide after?
Oh, where do I get my slides? I can send them to the conference. Is that good? And you guys can post them somewhere? I have them on, so actually they're on Google Slides, so I can like share the link. It'll be very easy. Yeah, and I'll try and post them on LinkedIn. I'm Laura M. Weaver on LinkedIn, or I'm Laura at whatnot.com. If you email me, I'll send them to you. So you were asking about Apollo and why are we getting rid of Apollo?
Yeah.
Okay, so GraphQL has some interesting properties. Its selling point is you can get any data that you want as long as it works in the schema. That's awesome. Maybe that is a little bit too opaque, to be honest. It's like so what happens is that you can structure GraphQL queries in a way that says, I want these properties and not understand how the backend is organized and optimized. So you might end up asking for queries that are very superficial that you don't really need, but you just kind of want that information, or it'd be easier to just have it in advance, that actually end up being very expensive, which is what took down our servers. It was that we were asking for seller ratings, I think, which is like, I was just like, oh, we'll just like grab the seller ratings when we get all the users. I didn't know that that was a totally separate table and an entirely separate system. And I was basically asking for 500 user seller ratings that I did not need. It was really a terrible optimization. So GraphQL is like a double-edged sword in that way. But Apollo is a client that gives you a way of talking with your GraphQL. For Apollo on iOS, it's actually a very invasive system. You have to like download this JSON schema and then create separate GraphQL files in separate like modules, and then from there run a script that will then download the new schema every time, refresh it all, and then it'll create a API.Swift file. That API.Swift file has some of the worst naming I have ever dealt with. I'm so sorry to call them out on that, but it is like just some crazy naming. We had some really weird issues around like subclassing that they basically said that they couldn't fix. They were super supportive and nice on GitHub. They're just really good people, but it just wasn't working for us. So it's a pretty intense system. Similarly invasive as I would say CocoaPods is. So like CocoaPods, I would recommend using Swift Package Manager, which is much more like lightweight. So there were just like a lot of different issues. Also that like increases your compile times, downloading a schema, rerunning, auto-generating all of that code. That's a big process. You're doing that every single build. It's a lot. So we ended up commenting it out and then deciding that we wanted to just like simplify the API and make it much easier. And first that requires some backend changes. So they've just finished their migration, and then we'll end up changing out our SDK. But all that's to say is like, you're going to come across in your careers, everyone's going to be into this like hot new technology or this one or that one. Like the thing that always stays around, native apps. Like those, Apple has like created the foundation to their business on native applications. They are not going anywhere. There is no technology that I believe will replace a native app, like Android or iOS. But like all these different SDKs that you can use and plug into your app, those are somewhat interchangeable depending on what like the needs of your backend are and the needs of your business.